Movement has always been a bittersweet part of my life. I was moving almost as soon as I was born. Starting from age 2 throughout my childhood, I moved over 7 times to 6 different cities on 2 different continents. While this enabled me to see more than just Sesame Street, it also made me feel very unsettled and different among kids who grew up in just one place. Rather than fantasizing about being a princess, I used to often fantasize about what a life of not moving would look like. How would I be if I were to be rooted in just one place, with one group of people, surrounded by constant familiarity? Little did I realize how much this fantasy of not moving would shape who I became and am still becoming. I think most of us can vividly remember looking for our first job. It's like the ultimate finding your place experience, because this is the first time that you're declaring to the world who you are and literally where you want to be. Since I'd been seen so much as a child, I was by nature a very curious person, and this curiosity led me to move in all sorts of directions. Not surprisingly, my first job interview also wasn't typical for what you'd expect for an English and philosophy major. How not typical, you ask? How about a fast-track financial management program? Without really knowing where it would lead, I barged headfirst into the interview, ignorant about what a finance job entailed, but nevertheless with nothing to lose. And to everyone's surprise, especially my own, I somehow managed to make it through as just one of a handful of final round candidates. In fact, it seemed so easy I couldn't help but think maybe this was some sort of a sign or destiny. So I was really confident going into that final round interview. I felt invincible. Invincible. From that first minute of that 3-on-1 interview, the interviewers showed no mercy. They brought up every indefensible weakness that I had. The fact that I was not a finance major, had not even taken a finance class, that my GPA wasn't stellar, even in the humanities courses I was supposed to be good at. In fact, by question number 3, they asked me point blank what I was doing there, since English and philosophy was, and I quote, so diametrically opposite of anything finance or quantitative. Now, don't remember exactly how I answered that question, but I do remember feeling, for the first time in my life, completely defeated, overwhelmed, and unable to move. After an hour that seemed like an eternity, I limped out of that interview ready to hide under a rock. But instead of a rock, I stumbled upon a familiar, kinder face. It was a gentleman who had been my first round interviewer. Recognizing me immediately, he grabbed me to have coffee together. And sitting there with him, right after such a harrowing experience, I felt a vast mix of emotions. Disappointment, despair, anger, mostly at myself, but frankly also at him. I kept thinking, what kind of cruel person would do what he did, get my hopes up and invite me, only subject me to that kind of torture? In fact, that was exactly what I asked him. What on my resume had been so brilliant and compelling to make him choose me? And to this day, I'll never forget his response. Turns out, this guy wasn't just my first round interviewer. He was the global head of recruiting. And in fact, he was the one who had picked out my resume and given me that coveted first interview. So it was all the more shocking when he told me he didn't pick me based on anything on my resume. It was actually something completely on the contrary. You see, he told me that I had been the only non-business major out of hundreds of candidates who applied. And this was what struck him. He admitted that he actually chose me out of sheer morbid curiosity, because he was so curious to see who this liberal arts person was who was crazy enough to apply for a finance job. So it was this unconventional move that had piqued his interest. He actually had no interest of letting me through any further rounds. But somehow, during that first interview, he once again found himself impressed by what wasn't on my resume. Having no direct experience for the job, I could only sell me, who I was, why I chose to apply, and how I could become whatever it was that they needed. I moved the way that I had hundreds of times before, leaping and twirling with excitement about all the possibilities that I could offer. Everything that I was, beyond the facts and numbers. And this was refreshing to him, because he saw in me a naivete and a willful spirit that he hadn't seen in other interviewees. Ironically, I had only been able to convey myself as someone who was unafraid to be outside my comfort zone because I was so unaware of how I could have been perceived or maybe even laughed at. And so, despite completely being unequipped, on paper, I had managed to articulate my value in a way that was compelling and genuine. That was why he picked me. Because that, unlike finance, couldn't be taught in a classroom or by reading a book. And guess what? I ended up getting an offer. It was truly a role of a lifetime. Imagine a barely 21-year-old, fresh out of college, getting the chance to work and live around the world in exotic places like Singapore and Johannesburg, on top of being fast-tracked to a management position. There was just one problem. It wasn't going to start in New York, where most of my classmates were headed. And somehow this fact bothered me. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but in retrospect, I realized that this fact crystallized my childhood fear of yet again being different and moving away from where everyone else was going. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't alone. There were so many other classmates who were making the same decision. So why not ask them for some advice? Maybe by finding some common ground on this dilemma, I could also find the answer. And who could have better advice than the business experts around me, my fellow classmates who were studying finance at our Wharton Business School? There's only one place to start a finance career, they told me, and that's Wall Street. For those of you younger folks, you guys may not understand the allure of working at an investment bank, but back 100 years ago, when I was in school, this was actually one of the most prestigious jobs. In fact, it shocked some of my classmates why I would bother to go to an Ivy League school if I wasn't going to try to apply for one of these elite Wall Street jobs. And little by little, that intuitive motion, the going with the flow movement, which had so naturally dictated my paths, it began to warp into something else. Rather than moving and jumping and leaping independently, I started to sink and to get bogged down in the collective anxieties of my peers. And with that, I was introduced to a new fear that I would struggle with for the rest of my life. A fear not just of moving, but of moving in the wrong direction. And being the impressionable 20-year-old I was, the right direction seemed to be where everyone else was going. So I thought, maybe if I could just imitate and follow these experts, I would be assured to find the most right path to success. As a result, I spent the next decade spiraling on the collective whims of others, and I moved and made career and life choices based on factors that were no longer my own. And it seemed like I had followed the right path. I landed my investment banking job on Wall Street, and then another one. I was accepted into a top MBA program, which landed me yet another lucrative Wall Street job. All this success upon success made me feel like I had not only made the right decision, but that I had honed a superpower of being able to compute my way to any optimal decision. I felt proud of myself for this, for being able to move and to come up with the most pragmatic decisions. And in many ways, I'm still proud of my ability to be my best robotic AI self. Little did I realize, though, that this new mobility pattern was eroding my previous one. The desire to fit in mutated into a fear of the unknowns that could come about if I were to diverge from the movements of everyone else. As Aristotle explained in his Metaphysics, every being, every object, has a unique essence that flows through it, which defines and makes it what he or she or it truly is. He called this the being qua being. Yes, I did achieve many years of professional success, and I became the best person that my fears could bring about. But at what cost? Had it been worth suppressing my being qua being, my individuality? Suppressing the person I had been during my first interview, someone who had been unafraid to challenge the world and to stubbornly stick with something, even if the chances of success seemed nearly impossible? If you go home today and ask your friends and family to describe you, what drives you, what makes you who you are, what would they say? Have they really gotten to know a you that's been proclaimed in your own way, through your own movements? The reformation of my being didn't come easily. In fact, it took my entire world falling apart. In the span of just 1 year, I lost my job, my partner, my finances, and most unexpectedly, my health. In fact, I was told I had a condition which may leave me unable to walk, to move on my own at some point. How's that for irony? Not quite what the 7-year-old me had in mind about not moving. With that one realization, all the defenses, all the walls that I had built up fell down. For the first time in a long time, everything I felt, everything I experienced was real, and it was all mine. It was unfiltered, it was messy, it was chaotic, and it was beautiful. It was both the best and the worst time in my life, because for the first time, I had no idea what would happen to the next day. And at the same time, I had no idea what could happen the next day. And I was so grateful, because it's not every day that we get the chance to see our natural, raw selves and to see our lives as it really is, without all the facades and the barriers. A key philosophical idea behind Taoism is that life, like water, has a natural flow, and that going with this flow is a part of our human existence. But how often are we truly willing to perceive that flow? Take a look at your life right now. Maybe you have a decision to make today. Maybe you're struggling with something that you don't think you have the answer for. How are you addressing this? Are you just following a map or a prescription that others have passed down to you? What would the childhood you do? Would he do the same? Why not? Think about what you've built up over time in your quest to reach those important life milestones. All the filters, all the walls, all the pragmatism. Have these interfered with your ability to follow the flow? Have they led you to believe, like I believed, that you can manipulate the flow to get to where you think you should be, rather than where you were meant to be? The current of life awaits all of us. How you mold and shape this journey is up to you. So what is one action that you can take tomorrow that will represent who you were, who you are, unfiltered by society's expectations, judgments, and even your own self-image of yourself? I didn't realize until it was almost too late how wonderful it is to keep flowing in the most natural and symbiotic way. Moving is a privilege, one of the most powerful attributes that we as human beings have. So embrace this. Don't overthink. Don't be afraid. Even when you can't always see what's ahead, or even if no one else is moving alongside you, because this is what will lead you towards those things that will make you feel truly connected, happy, and fearless. As the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Indian scripture, summed up beautifully, it is better to live your own destiny imperfectly than to live an imitation of someone else's life with perfection. In the 10 years since I've abandoned my contrived course and started moving with purpose, my life has been full of meaningful experiences and successes that I couldn't have imagined. I picked up and moved to a different country, a place where I'd never imagined I would live, where I knew no one and nothing was familiar. And since then, I've added another 3 new cities to my journey. I've now become fluent in the new languages that I never thought I could master. I've found jobs and a global network which enables me to connect with people and to contribute resources to making new ventures possible. I've conquered my fears and tried so many things that I had previously been afraid to do, like diving to the bottoms of oceans and traveling to the most remote parts of the world. I was buying my third house by the age of 40. And although I never fantasized about being a princess, I met my Prince Charming and married him in a centuries-old Italian castle. This Prince Charming, my now husband, reminds me daily, as he poetically did on our first date, that in life we, as humans, are all dancing in the wind. We don't always get solid footing to balance, but that's okay, because we should never expect to stay still and to be rooted in one place. The lighter we are on our feet, the more willing we are to tiptoe, to twirl, to leap beyond what we can see, the more we will enjoy and embrace every whimsical, random, and amazing step that we take. So don't be afraid of spinning, of jumping, of twerking, because it will only bring you closer to finding the you, the best you that you were meant to be. And no matter what you find at the end of the song, know that who you are is beautiful, and that who you are without fear is unstoppable. So let's put on our dancing shoes together, and let's go create something beautiful. A world where we can all be free to move according to our own beat, our own being qua being, and where with every twist and turn, we rise up stronger and more determined to finding our own imperfect but perfect destiny.